For those of you who don't know me, my name's Catherine Murphy. I'm the still relatively new director of Engender. I started back in May, and for those of you who I have met, hello again. But it's a real pleasure to be here, to be able to hear about the work that you're doing and to share some of our thoughts on the issues that are facing us at the moment. So just moving on to the next slide. I'm not sure if I can change it yet. So in terms of kind of I've been asked to share some reflections on kind of understanding and responding to the impact of the challenges that we're facing at the moment. I mean, many of you will be the experts in responding in real time directly to women and girls during the crises that we've endured in the last few years and decades, in your campaigning for change, delivering services and responding to evolving and increasing needs, as well as rolling out the aims of Equally Safe. So my intention is just to share some top line thoughts about the scale of the socioeconomic challenges we've faced, and what some of the urgent actions are that we see that could be done in the immediate term, and what some of our partners we're advocating for with our partners, and also some of the work on broader systemic change that we need to do in the longer term that will help to embed and galvanise the aims of Equally Safe across government and policy making. So the first thing I wanted to do is just to draw attention to the scale of the ongoing pressure and crises that we've been dealing with, that women and girls have been bearing the brunt of for the last decade, all of which have increased vulnerability and exposure to men's violence and have further ingrained inequality. So in terms of the context of the kind of compounding crisis we've been seeing, obviously at the moment we're dealing with cost of living, but that follows on from COVID pandemic, austerity, we had which we've had more than a decade of, and potentially looking at yet more of, but all within that gradual erosion of the social safety net, particularly across UK policy, labour protections, etc. And all of that happening on top of an already ingrained system of gendered inequalities and barriers. And all of this has kind of amounted to a constant undertow pulling against the developments that we have made, and potentially putting us on a precarious footing for future challenges that we know will disproportionately impact women and girls. So issues around continuing low wages, deregulation in the workforce, what's potentially going to come down the line in the Human Rights Act in the UK. All of these things, have implications for women and their experience of violence. And these crises have made it more difficult for us to respond. So just moving on to the next slide. I'm not sure. Yeah, great. So in terms of the ingrained systems and inequality that we're dealing with, I mean, all of you will know many of these, but I just thought it was worth kind of picking on some of it. So around the gender pay gap, which still sits at 10%, rising to 27% when we compare men's full-time earnings with women's part-time earnings, and the occupational segregation that women face, the disproportionate burden of caring responsibilities, unequal access to resources through life, so pension poverty, higher exposure to debt and social security, as well as the kind of cultural, social attitudes, gender stereotypes that so much work has been done through Equally Safe to address, and all of this and its implications for the gendered cycles of violence, the kind of cause and consequence of inequality. So just moving on, so sorry, I'm trying to balance different screens here, apologies. So if I just move on to the next slide. So in terms of austerity and erosion of the social safety net, I won't go into great detail because this is obviously a whistle-stop tour of the issues that we're facing. But just to highlight two things, that the House of Commons Library estimates that 86% of net savings that have been carved from social security and public services across the UK between 2010 and 2020 will have come from women's incomes. So austerity has had a very deep and lasting impact on women's experiences. The UN Special Rapporteur for Extreme Poverty described universal credit by saying, if a group of misogynists together were together in a room and you said, how can you make this system work for men but not women, they wouldn't have come up with too many ideas of what's, other than what's in place. So we're looking at a deeply misogynistic social security system in the UK. I know a lot of work has been done in Scotland now to try and address and mitigate some of those harms, but that is part of the problems that we're facing. So just going on to the next slide. So in terms of the impact of COVID, many of you will know, UN Women estimates that all forms of violence against women and girls intensified during the pandemic, with the UN describing it as a shadow pandemic. Evidence from previous crises already showed that risk factors for violence increased during these times. But EU research demonstrates that no member state within the EU had a gender-sensitive crisis plan, and the UK was also guilty of that to address possible surges in violence against women. And instead, we were relying throughout the pandemic on reactive national policies and plans that were implemented after the outbreak of COVID. So just going on to the next slide. So coming to the most recent crisis that we're dealing with, we know that women are bearing the disproportionate brunt of rocketing inflation, household energy and food costs, and real-term cuts to wages and social security. They're acting as society's buffers, absorbing much of the impact and lessening the harms on children and adults requiring care. Women absorb a lot of that. Research by Women's Aid has already shown that the cost of living crisis is worsening the violence experienced by women, with a recent research done in England showing that 73% of respondents said that it had prevented them from leaving their abusive partner or made it harder to do so. And we know that all of this is felt most acutely by those who are facing already economic barriers. So we know that women in households earning less than £10,000 are more than 4 times as likely to experience abuse from a partner than those in households earning over 50,000. We also know that Black, minority ethnic, disabled women and women facing other forms of marginalisation are more at risk. Next slide. So some of the urgent actions that we're calling on the Scottish Government, I'm sharing these. These are focused on Scottish Government at the moment, but for people in the room, we know that we want you also to be thinking about the urgent things that can be done. But we're advocating for fast track delivery of automatic split payments of universal credit in Scotland from the outset of claims. The household payment system within universal credit is working against women who are facing abuse by partners or wanting to leave abusive partners. We're also advocating, along with Women's Aid and others, for a dedicated fund to support women leaving an abusive partner and to bridge the 5-week wait for universal credit. And we're hopeful for some movement on these two things in the coming months. We're advocating for implementation of the Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Act, which allows social landlords to apply to end joint tenancies and grant a new tenancy to women. Just move on to the next slide. Some of the other things we're advocating for is emergency boost to Scottish Welfare Fund, increased Scottish Child Payment, which has already been increased to £25, but we're hoping the Scottish Government will go further, and act to fill the evidence gaps and prevent destitution for the most marginalised women in Scotland, including those with no recourse to public funds. So next slide. So beyond this, we're also, as many people already have said, advocating for broader systems change. Our perspective is that the kind of hard fought for progress secured via Scottish Government and initiatives and investment like Equally Safe, the gender pay gap, and the recommendations of the First Minister's National Advisory Council on Women and Girls are likely to become increasingly precarious without more concerted action on the gendered impacts of these crises. So action that strengthens the impact and reach of targeted interventions of Equally Safe and looks beyond to broader systems change and mainstreaming of Equally Safe, so that the entire mechanisms of government are working cohesively to address gender inequality and violence against women and girls. So I'm just sharing some of the things there that we think that need to be addressed through primary prevention. So work in the labour market, social security, planning environment, health and social care, the wellbeing economy and inclusive growth. These are all things where we need to make really concerted efforts to integrate a mainstreamed approach to violence against women. And at Engender, we're working with partners at Scottish Women's Aid and Rape Crisis and others to do work around this. And we've been doing some research recently that we'll hope to share in 2023 around some of the areas where we think we could make the most impact on primary prevention, areas like transport and housing, where we often see bias or an assumption that they're gender neutral. So that has been a very rapid, breathless canter through a lot of these issues. I'll stop there. Apologies if I've slightly ran over time, and I'll pass over to others.